Welcome to Echo Forge, dark fantasy and sci-fi stories from the edges of forgotten worlds. If you enjoy this kind of storytelling, hit like, subscribe, and tap the bell so you don't miss the next vision. Now, let's step through the gate. The first thing Cal Rourke understood was that he was breathing. The second thing was that the ship didn't want him to. Air pushed into his lungs in thin, measured pulses, too cold, too dry, and laced with the faint chemical taste of plastic tubing that had sat unused for far too long. Something clung to his face, a mask sealed hard against his cheeks, its straps biting into skin that still hadn't quite remembered pain. He opened his eyes, black, not dim, not night cycle, not we're running low power, the kind of black that felt deliberate, as if someone had decided light itself was a liability and shut it away. A slow thump pulsed through the cradle beneath him, deep, distant, rhythmic. Not an alarm, not the ship's normal hum, more like an old pump cycling in the dark, performing a job out of habit, long after anyone had stopped checking if it was still necessary. Thump, thump, thump. Cal tried to move and found his arms were late. His fingers twitched as though someone else had sent the signal, and his body was only just now receiving it. Cryosleep hangover. Blood thick, nerves sluggish, mind arriving before muscles. He forced his right hand upward until it found the edge of the mask. The seal resisted. He pulled. The mask popped free with a soft suction sound. Air hit his mouth raw. His throat spasmed. He coughed, one harsh bark, then another, each one scraping his windpipe like wire. He sucked in again and tasted the room. Antiseptic, old metal, something faintly sour like coolant that had sat too long in a sealed line. His brain reached for context and found a blank wall. Last memory. Bright corridor lighting, too bright, someone shouting his name. Cal, Cal, move. A hand on his upper arm, not gentle. A shove toward the medbay. A voice, Captain Callin, Medic Wren, blurred by adrenaline. He remembered the sound of the cryo lid closing, heavy, final, the kind of sound you couldn't take back. Then the cold bloomed through him and the universe narrowed to nothing. Now, black. He blinked hard, trying to make shapes out of darkness. Near his knees, something blinked. A single red LED, pulsing slow and stubborn. Alive. 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 Cal leaned forward, squinting. The red light belonged to a portable emergency pack, mounted under the cryo cradle, standard backup power for pods during grid drop. So the ship's grid was down, or had been shut down. He swallowed. It hurt. His mouth was so dry his tongue felt like it had been dusted with grit. He reached for the cradle's release panel by feel. The panel was dead, no backlight, but the tactile icons were familiar. Emergency release, strap release, manual latch. He hit the emergency release. Nothing. He hit it again, harder. A hollow clack answered, like something mechanical trying to engage and failing. Beyond the medbay walls, somewhere in the ship, something clicked once, as if a distant relay had tried to respond and decided against it. Cal froze. The thump continued, patient. The click didn't repeat. He held his breath without meaning to, listening for a footstep, a voice, an alarm, anything. Silence. Not the comfortable silence of a sleeping crew, the silence of a place with no one in it. He forced himself to move again. He fumbled at the straps holding him half-seated. They were loose. Maybe the pod had already run its wake cycle and waited. He popped the buckles and let the restraints fall away. His legs felt too light when he swung them down. His boots met metal decking, cold enough to bite through the sole. Gravity was wrong. Not absent, but reduced. Like the ship had dialed it down to a conservative setting and never bothered to return it. Cal pushed himself upright. The room tilted. His stomach rolled. Blackness smeared into darker and less dark. He grabbed the edge of the cradle and waited until the nausea dulled. "Okay," he rasped into the dark, just to hear a human sound. His voice sounded wrong, too loud, too lonely. The sound fell into the darkness and never came back. He stepped away from the cradle with hands outstretched like a blind man. His fingertips hit a counter almost immediately, smooth composite, cold. He slid his hand along it, feeling for handles, for familiar medbay geometry. Cabinet seam. He pulled. Nothing moved. He found the latch, pressed it. The latch shifted, but the door didn't. Cal traced the seam with his fingertips and felt a rough bead along the edge. Sealant. His stomach tightened. He moved to the next cabinet. Same bead. Next drawer. Same. Another. Same. Not factory seals, not neat quarantine strips. Messy, hand-applied compound, thick in some places and thin in others, as if whoever did it had been working fast with shaking hands. He turned toward where the main medbay door should be and shuffled until his shin bumped metal. The door. He felt for the control panel and slapped it. Nothing. No glow, no chime, no reluctant motor. He leaned closer, sniffed. That same chemical tang, sealant again. They hadn't just locked him in. They'd sealed the door. The thought landed with weight. He ran his fingers along the panel edge, found the manual override cover, and tried to slide it open. It wouldn't move. His nail caught and snapped slightly, pain sharp and stupid. He swore under his breath and pressed his forehead to the cold metal for a second, fighting the urge to panic. Think like an engineer. If the ship's main grid was down, doors wouldn't respond. But the medbay should have emergency lighting independent of the main bus, unless the local distribution fuse had blown, or unless someone had blown it on purpose. He forced himself away from the door and searched the wall by touch until his fingers found a rectangular seam. Maintenance access. He flipped the latches. Stiff, but they moved. The hatch swung open with a soft sigh. Warm plastic smell drifted out. Old dust. Faint, sour coolant. He needed light. The portable pack under the cradle had a work lamp integrated for emergencies. Cal crouched, found the pack by the red LED, and toggled the lamp switch. The lamp blinked once, weak, almost apologetic, then steadied into a narrow cone of pale light. The medbay emerged in slices. Counters, cabinets crusted at their edges with frost, a crash cart tipped slightly, wheels locked, a diagnostic station dark and dead. Across the room, a second cryo cradle sat. Empty. Its lid hung open like a mouth that had forgotten how to close. Cal's throat tightened. Empty meant someone had been here. Someone had gotten out, or someone had been taken out. He forced himself to look away and aimed the lamp into the maintenance cavity. Cable bundles, conduits, a junction housing feeding medbay subsystems. The housing cover was held by screws. Cal patted his jumpsuit pockets out of habit, empty. Cryo protocols. He swung the lamp toward the crash cart tray again. Instruments glinted. Clamps, forceps, sealed scalpels, their sterile sleeves fogged with condensation. He grabbed a clamp, heavy, blunt, and used it as a makeshift driver. Awkward leverage. The screws squealed as they loosened. When the cover came free, he saw the problem immediately. The primary fuse link was blown, blackened, and warped. He stared at it. Standby power shouldn't blow a medbay fuse, not unless there had been a surge, or someone had deliberately overloaded the circuit to cut power. He scanned the housing for the bypass option. There it was, a manual emergency switch that could reroute minimal power to essential medbay functions, emergency strips, door panel logic, basic monitoring. He hesitated with his fingers on the switch. If someone sealed the medbay to keep him safe, restoring door logic might make it easier to open, which might be exactly what he was not supposed to do. His mind offered him a memory, someone's hand on his arm, forcing him toward the pod, voice urgent. Don't argue. Cal swallowed hard. He flipped the bypass. A click inside the junction housing. A faint tremor through the wall. Then the ceiling strip light stuttered. One segment glowed dim amber. Another tried and failed. The strip flickered twice, then stabilized into a patchy, sickly line of light. The medbay brightened enough for his eyes to stop straining, and bright enough for him to see what his hands had already felt. Sealant everywhere, across cabinet seams, across the diagnostic station drawer, across the decontamination hatch that led, stupidly, into hydroponics, across the main medbay door, smeared thick over the manual release cover, like someone had wanted to erase the very concept of exit. Cal stared at the door. They'd sealed him in. Not a malfunction, not an accident, a choice. Anger flared hot and clean. Then fear slid in behind it like a blade. Why seal him in unless there was something outside that mattered more than his freedom? He turned back toward the open cryo cradle across the room, the empty one. He walked to it on legs that still didn't feel fully his and aimed the lamp into the cradle's gel-lined interior. No obvious blood, no torn straps, but the frost along the rim was disturbed, smears where a hand had pushed. On the deck beneath it, dust had been dragged, a faint line, as if someone had hauled themselves out and crawled before standing. Not fresh. The dust was old, settled. The smears had dried. Time had passed. Cal's stomach tightened around the implication. He moved behind the empty cradle and found a personal effects locker built into the wall. His locker, assigned to his pod. He pulled the latch. It opened. Inside, his jacket, his tool belt, his pouch. Relief hit him so hard he almost laughed. Then he saw the polymer paper tucked behind the pouch, folded small, hidden. He unfolded it slowly. The handwriting was jagged, pressed hard enough to scar the page. Cal -- his name. If you wake up, do not open the medbay door. We sealed you in. It's not punishment. It's the only way. It can mimic voices. It can make you think someone is calling from the hall. If you hear it, don't answer. We're sorry. The paper trembled in his hand. Cal read it twice, then a third time as if repetition could make it less real. It didn't. The note wasn't protocol. It wasn't a printed hazard notice. It was a person, someone he knew, writing in a hurry. He could almost see the medic's hands shaking as she wrote it, trying to make the words legible through fear. He looked at the sealed main door again. His anger cooled into something heavier, a creature, not an anomaly, not an abstract threat, something with teeth and weight and a voice it could borrow. His mind tried to reject it. Cryodelirium, stress hallucinations, isolation. But the sealant was real under his fingernails. The empty pod was real. The note was real. He strapped his tool belt on with the hands that shook. The familiar weight settled him. Wrenches, cutters, compact driver set, diagnostic meter, induction heater coil, a small spool of wire. Tools didn't lie. He checked the locker's lower compartment. Medbay emergency kit, water pouches, nutrient gel, bandages, a stim patch, and a violet-labeled canister, amethyst, med-sterilant purge. Warning, asphyxiant. Use only in sealed compartment. Cal stared at it. Amethyst was a sterilant purge gas, used to disinfect sealed compartments. It displaced oxygen with a chemically clean atmosphere and left equipment intact. He set it back carefully. Not now. Not until he knew what he was doing. He folded the note and shoved it into his jacket pocket like talisman and burden both. Then he stood in the medbay's dim amber and listened. The ship's distant thump continued. For a long moment, nothing else. Then, beyond the sealed main door, a faint sound. A slow scrape, like something dragging lightly along metal. Cal froze. The scrape stopped. Silence returned, thick and patient. His heart hammered in his ears. He forced himself to breathe slowly. If you hear it, don't answer. He didn't speak. He didn't call out. He moved instead, because stillness was how fear grew roots. 2 exits, the sealed main door to the corridor, and the decon hatch into hydroponics. The note said not to open the medbay door. It didn't mention hydroponics. Cal crossed to the decon hatch. It was sealed too, but the sealant bead here looked thinner, sloppier, and the smears of application were on this side of the seam. Whoever sealed it had been inside the medbay, which meant someone had stood in this room awake, long enough to seal him in, and then left, or been taken. Cal crouched and examined the compound lined by lamp. Tool marks scarred the metal beneath. Someone had pried at the hatch once, then decided sealing was faster. He took out his sealant scraper and started cutting. The compound resisted. Elastic, stubborn, designed to hold pressure. He worked carefully, peeling it away in strips. His fingers cramped, his shoulders burned. Halfway through, the ship groaned somewhere deep, metal flexing under thermal stress. The sound rolled through the floor like distant thunder. Cal paused, listening. A faint tapping came from the other side of the hatch. Once, twice, then nothing. His skin prickled. He held his breath. No repeat. He forced his hands back to work, telling himself it was a pipe tick, an old pump cycle, metal contracting. When the last strip of sealant peeled away, he gripped the hatch wheel and turned. It squealed, a loud, protesting sound that felt obscene in the medbay's hush. The hatch cracked open. Warm, wet air breathed in, carrying the smell of damp soil and rot-sweet plant matter. Cal pulled it wider. Hydroponics lay beyond. Dark canopy overhead where grow lights should have been. Rows of planters stretching into gloom. Some plants were dead, brittle. Others were pale and alive in a sickly way. Vines crawling along rails, leaves thin as skin. Condensation filmed surfaces. Droplets clung to the canopy like a starfield of water. The air was heavy, clinging to his skin. Cal stepped through. Behind him, the medbay's amber light glowed like the inside of a lantern. He kept one hand on the hatch wheel, unwilling to let it close on its own. He looked back once into the medbay. Cryo cradle, sealed cabinets, the main door scarred with sealant. The empty cryo cradle's lid still gaped open. Then he looked forward again into hydroponics' damp darkness and realized how much he'd been relying on the medbay's sterility to feel safe. Hydroponics wasn't sterile. Hydroponics was alive. He eased the hatch mostly shut behind him, leaving it unlatched. A compromise, a way to tell himself he could still retreat. Then he moved deeper into the bay. His lamp beam slid over pale leaves. The floor was slick. His boots left dark prints. Low gravity made every step feel too light, as if the humidity might lift him off the deck if he wasn't careful. He approached the hydroponics control column, pressed the panel. Nothing. He popped it open with his driver. Corrosion bloomed along boards, green-white fuzz at solder points. Months of stale humidity had eaten it. He checked the feed with his meter. A trickle of standby voltage, enough to tease, not enough to run pumps or lights. The ship wasn't dead. It was sleeping with one eye open. Cal swung his lamp along the planters. Something had been feeding. Not on light, not on nutrient flow, but there were cut stems, ragged bites in leaves. A planter row with soil disturbed, as if something had dug. A smear of dried, translucent residue clung to a support rail. Cal leaned in, stared. The residue looked like mucus that had dried thin. When he touched it with a gloved finger, it flaked slightly, leaving a tacky streak. His stomach tightened. Not plant sap. Wrong color. Wrong smell. Faintly sour, like old meat left too long in cold air. He straightened and swept the lamp farther down the aisle. At the far end of the bay, a maintenance hatch led into a crawl space connecting hydroponics to the ship's distribution trunk. Cal remembered the hatch location because he'd complained about it during installation. Too tight, too damp, too easy for mold. Now he walked to it like it was a lifeline. He opened it. Cold, dry air drifted out from the crawl space. Dust lay thick on the ribs of the ship's inner skin, except for a line drawn through it, a drag mark. Cal aimed the lamp deeper. The mark continued into darkness. His mouth went dry. The mark wasn't wheel tracks. It wasn't a cart line. It wasn't a maintenance sled. It was too uneven, like something had crawled, stopping, starting, pressing weight, sliding. He tried to tell himself it was a bundled cable dragged during emergency repairs, but the note's words sat heavy in his pocket. A creature. It can mimic voices. He swallowed hard and climbed into the crawl space anyway, because the alternative was to go back to medbay and wait for the emergency pack to die while something scraped the door. The hatch clicked shut behind him. Hydroponics' damp whisper faded. The crawl space swallowed his lamp beam, and Cal crawled toward the ship's spine with the drag mark ahead of him, like an arrow pointing toward answers he wasn't sure he wanted. The crawl space narrowed after a few meters, forcing Cal onto elbows and knees. Dust clung to his gloves. The air grew colder, dry enough to sting his nostrils. His lamp beam made the space feel even tighter. An illuminated tunnel surrounded by black. The drag mark continued, faint in the dust, disappearing around a bend. Cal tried not to stare at it too long. Staring made his mind start completing patterns. And patterns, right now, were dangerous. He moved by touch as much as sight. Cable bundles, duct ribs, junction boxes, the ship's skeleton. Every few meters he paused, listening. Nothing but the distant thump, slower now, as if the ship itself was tired. And occasionally, so faint he could convince himself it was the ship settling, a soft tick somewhere in the metal. He crawled faster. The crawl space widened at a junction and angled upward. A maintenance grate above led into a service corridor. He pushed. The grate resisted, then gave with a groan that echoed too far. Cal climbed out. The corridor smelled like emptiness. Cold metal, old ozone, dust. Emergency strips here were dead. His lamp carved a narrow cone through darkness. His boots sounded too loud on the deck plating, even with low gravity softening his steps. Cal swept the lamp along the walls. Scuff marks, shallow dents, gouges like something heavy had struck metal in a hurry. Not routine wear. Impacts. He stopped at one dent and ran his thumb along the crease. The metal was bent inward. Something had hit it from the corridor side, hard enough to deform composite plating. Cal swallowed and forced himself onward. A distribution node cabinet sat half a corridor down, the size of a locker, marked with faded hazard triangles. S. E. C. NODED-4/AUXFEED. He knelt and popped the latch. Inside, breaker arrays sat in neat rows. Every breaker was thrown hard off. Manual. His stomach tightened. This wasn't a random cascade of failure. Someone had walked this corridor and shut systems down by hand, like sealing doors in a burning building. Cal hovered his finger over the first breaker. Flipping it felt like turning a key in a haunted house. But he couldn't stay blind. He couldn't stay in pockets of dead air and darkness. He flipped it. A click echoed down the corridor. A faint hum rose as the bus took load. His lamp flickered sympathetically. He flipped a second breaker, then a third. The corridor's emergency strip sputtered. One segment glowed dim amber and died. Another blinked once, like an eyelid, then went dark. Cal swore softly and checked the converter module. Corrosion, moisture, time. He pulled the converter, cracked it open, and worked with practiced hands. Scrape corrosion, reseat contacts, bypass a dead trace with a wire jumper. He did it by feel as much as sight. Lamp angled into the cabinet. Tool steadied him. Wires obeyed rules. He reinstalled the converter and flipped the breaker again. This time, the emergency strip lit in a stuttering line down the corridor, dim but steady. The ship revealed itself reluctantly. Doors lined both sides, crew quarters, storage, galley access. Some doors were sealed with compound. Some had welded plates bolted across them. Some looked untouched, closed but unsealed. The inconsistency bothered him more than any one sealed door. It was a map of panic. He approached the nearest untouched door and pressed the panel. No response. Motors were still offline on minimal power. He found the manual lever and pulled. The door hissed open a handspan, seals breaking their long hold with a reluctant sigh. Stale air spilled out, cold and dry. Cal widened the door and aimed his lamp inside. A crew cabin, bunk, locker, a mug tipped on its side, a datapad wedged against a wall by a strap. Dust everywhere, undisturbed except for a clean rectangle on the desk, where something had been removed. The bed was unmade, sheets tangled like someone had gotten up fast. No body. Cal stepped in, swept the lamp beam. The locker stood open. Boots missing. Uniform jacket gone. A strap dangling from a hook, swaying slightly in low gravity. Cal held his breath, watching the strap. It swayed once more, then stilled. Maybe his movement had pushed air. Maybe. He backed out and closed the door again, suddenly unwilling to trespass further into the quiet evidence of lives. He moved down the corridor, checking each distribution node, flipping breakers, repairing converters where needed. Each revived section added a layer of sound to the ship. Fans attempting to spin, compressors thumping once then settling, relays clicking as dormant systems negotiated handshakes. The ship was trying to remember how to be a ship, and Cal could feel it changing as it woke, like the air itself was becoming a medium for something that had been waiting. He passed a doorway sealed thick with compound. Under the sealant, the frame was scratched. Not tool scratches. Long, shallow gouges clustered near where hands would push, like something had tried to claw its way out. Cal's stomach rolled. He forced himself away, moving faster now. At the end of the corridor, a stairwell descended to lower decks. He remembered the ship's layout in broad strokes. Auxiliary power room mid-deck, distribution trunk below, command and bridge forward along the spine. If he could restart auxiliary power, he could stabilize voltage, bring on minimal ship-wide lighting, and stop relying on his portable pack. He descended. With each level down, the air grew colder. The smell shifted to sharper metal and faint burned insulation. The distant thump grew louder, less like a heartbeat and more like a pump cycling somewhere deep. On the landing between decks, Cal's lamp caught something on the stairwell wall. A dark smear. Dried, nearly black. He leaned closer. Not oil, too matte. He scraped it lightly with a gloved finger and saw a faint reddish-brown beneath. Blood. Old. Dry enough to flake. Cal's stomach tightened. No bodies, no rot, no gore. Just evidence. He forced himself to keep moving. The auxiliary power room hatch sat at the bottom of the stairwell, heavy and unlabeled except for a small stencil. A UXPOWER. The hatch was locked with a mechanical latch, not sealed, not welded. Cal opened it quickly with his kit and slipped inside. The room was cramped, packed with battery banks, fuel cell housings, and the auxiliary reactor control module. Frost filmed the piping. Dust lay in still drifts. He aimed his lamp at the battery readouts. Minimal charge. Enough to keep emergency strips and cryo packs alive. Nothing more. Fuel cells were empty. He checked the auxiliary reactor ignition system. The reactor could start if coolant flow was primed and control circuits were intact. Coolant pump seized. Bearings frozen. Cal exhaled slow, feeling the scale of the job settle into his shoulders. This wasn't pushing a button. This was persuading a dead machine to breathe. He warmed the pump casing with his induction heater. Frost sweated and ran. He tapped the housing with the handle of a wrench, listening for the change in tone that meant bearings had loosened. The pump twitched. Cal almost smiled. Then he heard it. A soft sound in the corridor outside the aux room. Not a relay click. Not metal settling. A drag. Slow, careful, like something heavy moving without wanting to be heard. Cal froze mid-motion, wrench raised. He listened. Silence. He waited for a second drag. Nothing. His skin prickled. He forced himself back to work, faster now, not because speed was smart, but because fear demanded completion. He bled old coolant pressure through a manual valve. The valve squealed, loud and obscene in the ship's quiet. The sound traveled and died slowly. Cal held still after it, listening for an answering sound from the corridor. Nothing. He rerouted a control signal around a corroded connector, splicing wires with shaking hands, checked continuity. Good. He primed the coolant loop. His hand hovered over the ignition. He hesitated. Bringing auxiliary power online would wake the ship further. Fans, doors, lights. It would make the ship a living environment again. And the note had said a creature could mimic voices. That meant it used air. That meant it needed the ship awake enough to carry sound. The crew had shut the ship down to starve it. He was about to feed it. Cal swallowed hard and turned the ignition. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then the reactor breathed. A low vibration rolled through the deck plates, deeper than the earlier thump. Dust lifted in tiny puffs. Frost shivered on pipes. Indicator lights flickered to life, dim, then steadier. Somewhere in the corridor outside, emergency strips brightened. The ship's background hum deepened. And then, like a whisper given lungs, vent fans began to spin. At first, they whined, struggling. Then they smoothed into a soft, steady hush. The ship wasn't awake, but it was stirring. Cal sat back on his heels, sweat cooling on his neck, and felt a brief, fragile wave of relief. Then the hush of the fans changed. It gained an irregularity, an almost imperceptible stutter, as if something had brushed a vent blade in passing. Cal stood slowly, lamp raised, and edged toward the O-room doorway. The corridor beyond was dim amber now, lit by revived emergency strips. No one stood there. But halfway down the corridor, a door was open a few inches. Cal stared. He was almost sure it had been closed earlier. Almost. He stepped out, moving toward it with the careful, controlled pace of someone approaching a sleeping animal. The open door revealed a storage bay, shelves and straps, mostly empty. Dust lay thick on the deck, and in the dust, tracks, not bare human footprints, not boots, something else. 3-pronged impressions, like a hand with too many joints, pressed into dust and dragged slightly at the edges. A smear line ran between them, faint, glossy residue that caught his lamplight. Cal's mouth went dry. He crouched and stared harder. The tracks led into the storage bay and out through the far door, which sat slightly ajar. The far door shouldn't be ajar. Doors defaulted sealed, unless a latch failed, unless something held it. Cal backed away and shut the storage bay door carefully. It didn't seal fully. It caught on something, leaving a narrow gap. From the gap, cold air leaked, and with it came a smell that didn't belong in a clean storage bay. Sour sweet rot, layered with something animal. Musk, old fur, damp hide. Cal's stomach turned. He stepped back from the door, heart hammering. He wanted to tell himself it was a rat bot, a maintenance crawler, something mechanical leaving odd tracks. But the smell. Mechanics didn't smell like wet animal. Cal turned away and moved quickly, not running, because running was noise, but moving with purpose back toward the stairwell. He needed the bridge. He needed logs. He needed to know what the crew had met, what they'd done, why they'd sealed him in. And he needed, suddenly, to not be standing in the same corridor as whatever left those tracks. As he climbed, the ship's sounds multiplied. Fans whispering, compressors thumping into rhythm, relays clicking. Each sound was normal. Each sound also felt like the ship offering pathways to something that had been trapped in stillness. On the next deck up, Cal's lamp beam caught a vent grill hanging slightly loose. He stopped. The grill was bent outward at one corner, as if something had pushed through from inside the duct. He aimed his lamp into the dark behind it. only black, swallowing the beam after a meter. A faint scrape came from deeper in the duct. Cal froze. The scrape stopped, and he backed away from the grill without turning his back to it. He kept moving. He reached the corridor leading toward the central spine bulkhead, the main artery toward command and bridge. Emergency strips here were steadier now, dim but consistent. The spine bulkhead door was heavier than standard compartment doors, meant to isolate sections in emergencies. It had a status panel and a manual wheel. The status panel glowed faintly green. Cal put his hand on the wheel and turned. Seals broke their long hold with a groan. The wheel resisted, then moved. The bulkhead door cracked open. Cold, dry air spilled out from the spine corridor. The smell was different, thin, almost sterile, as if the ship had kept this section dry on purpose. Cal aimed his lamp into the opening. The spine corridor ran long and straight, handrails along the walls, overhead ducts following the ceiling line. Main lights dead, emergency strips patchy. Halfway down the corridor, a ceiling duct grill hung open, bent outward. His stomach tightened, as if something had come out of the ducts. He stepped into the spine anyway, because every path behind him led back to hydroponics dam and the storage bay tracks and the sealed medbay door. His lamp beam trembled as it cut down the long corridor. Dust lay uneven on the deck. Faint scuffs disturbed it, drag marks, partial smears, not clean enough to read. Movement had happened here after shutdown, or during it. Cal passed a sealed door along the spine, a thick bead of compound around its seam. Beneath the sealant, the frame was scratched deep, not tool slips, 4 parallel gouges, repeated, like a hand with claws had raked at the metal until it gave up. Cal's throat tightened. He kept moving, faster now, one hand on the rail for balance in low gravity. At the far end of the spine, the corridor narrowed into a security checkpoint. 2 doors in sequence, with a control niche between them. Beyond that lay command access toward the bridge deck. The first security door's status panel blinked as he approached, proximity sensor recognizing movement. Then it blinked again, brighter. The door didn't open. It held shut, locked behind higher authorization. Cal stood there, lamp steady, and waited. He didn't know why he waited. He only knew that after 6 months of silence, a blinking panel felt like eye contact. The panel blinked a 3rd time, then went dark. A faint sound came from behind him in the spine corridor. Not a click, not a fan. A soft, wet inhale, like something smelling the air. Cal turned slowly. His lamp beam swept the corridor behind him. Empty, no shape, no movement. But a few meters back, one of the overhead duct grills, an intact one, shifted slightly, as if something on the other side had pressed against it and released. Cal's pulse hammered. He forced himself not to speak, not to call out, not to tell it he was there. He turned back to the security door. He opened the control niche panel with his driver and peered inside. Wiring harnesses, lock core, authorization bus, maintenance conduit running up into the ceiling. He could bypass it. He knew how. It would take time and steady hands. Time, now, was a resource that felt like it was being hunted. Cal started mapping the bypass in his head. Service pins, maintenance jumper, lock core state. As he worked, a faint thump traveled through the spine corridor behind him. Not the ship's deep thump. This was closer. He felt it through the deck, a weight shifting. Cal's hands went cold. He didn't look back. Not yet. Looking back was how fear stole your hands. He reached up, pried open the ceiling panel above the control niche, and saw the void space, beams, cable trays, vent trunks. His lamp beam caught on a service box bolted to a beam. Security override node. Cal stared at it. Too neat, too obvious, too perfect. He reached for it anyway, because he didn't have a choice. As his fingers brushed the service box screws, the spine corridor behind him filled with a new sound, quiet but unmistakable. A slow scraping of claws on metal. Not a hallucination, not the ship settling. Claws. Cal's breath shortened. He forced his hands to keep moving. One screw, two. Metal squealed softly. Behind him, the scraping stopped. Silence returned, thick, watchful. Cal didn't turn. He opened the service box. Inside was a maintenance jumper port and a manual lockout tab flipped to engaged. Human hands again. Someone had locked the bridge away. Cal's fingers hovered over the tab. He felt, more than heard, a shift in the air behind him, like something had moved closer, just out of his lamp's cone. He swallowed hard and flipped the lockout tab. The lockout tab clicked into its new position with a sound that was too small to matter and too loud to ignore. Cal held still, fingertips resting on the metal, waiting for some dramatic consequence, an alarm, a chime, a harsh synthetic voice demanding authorization. Nothing, only the distant thump, steady as a tired heart. Then the security door in front of him made a sound through the deck plates, a soft internal shift, like a mechanism loosening its jaw. The status panel on the door flickered. No auth blinked once. Then the icon changed to a crude, utilitarian label, M-A-I-N-T. Cal exhaled through his nose, slow. Relief tried to arrive, and he refused it at the door. Relief made you careless. Behind him, in the spine corridor, something scraped lightly across metal. Not a fan blade, not a relay. A drag, measured and deliberate, like claws being tested against a surface to learn what it could withstand. Cal didn't turn. He kept his eyes on the security door, forced his hands to work. Up in the ceiling void, he plugged his jumper into the maintenance port and bridged the service pins. The override box LED blinked green. Override active. The scraping stopped. Silence pressed in. Cal climbed down slowly, every movement controlled to keep his own breathing from becoming a beacon. He reached for the manual wheel on the security door. His hands slipped on the cold metal the first time. He wiped them on his jumpsuit without thinking and grabbed again. He turned. The wheel resisted, then gave with a groan that traveled down the corridor like a complaint. Seals broke their long hold one by one with soft, rubbery pops. He cracked the door open an inch. Cold air spilled out from the bridge access corridor, drier than the spine, with a faint ozone tang and the stale smell of fabric sealed too long. Cal widened the gap and aimed his lamp through. A short corridor led forward, smooth walls, low ceiling, a faint floor strip that glowed like dying embers. 2 more doors at the far end, bridge access. On the wall beside the corridor entrance, half lit in his lamp beam, a stencil, bridge, quarantined access, quarantined. The note in his pocket felt heavier. Cal stepped through. Something moved behind him, quick and low, too fast for his eyes to catch cleanly. A shadow flicked across the floor strip light, not human-shaped. Wrong angles, too many joints. His skin went cold. He spun halfway, lamp snapping back. and saw only the spine corridor beyond the security door. Dim amber strips, empty air, nothing standing in the open. But the smell drifted in with the air behind him now. Faint, sour, animal musk, layered under metal and dust. It wasn't strong. It was just enough to tell him he wasn't imagining it. Cal didn't hesitate. He hauled the security door shut and spun the wheel hard, sealing it. Rubber seals kissed. The door's mechanism clunked into a locked state with a finality he could feel in his teeth. For a heartbeat, he stood with his forehead pressed to the cold metal, listening. Nothing. Then, faintly through the door, 3 soft taps. Not from a speaker, from metal. Claws testing the barrier. 1, 2, 3. Then silence again, as if whatever was out there had learned enough for the moment. Cal backed away. He forced his feet down the quarantine corridor toward the bridge. The floor strip lighting flickered as he moved, dim amber at ankle height. His lamp stayed low, cutting a narrow tunnel, refusing to illuminate corners that wanted to be stories. The corridor ended at the first of 2 doors, a thick seal with a panel that glowed faintly and displayed a warning icon. Safe mode. He pressed it. A dull denial chime answered, weak, tired. He popped the panel cover and found the manual release cover smeared with compound. Sealant again. Someone had sealed this too, and not carefully. The compound had fingerprints in it, ridges where someone's gloved hand had dragged through in a hurry. Cal's throat tightened. He pulled out his scraper and began cutting, careful not to gouge the seal underneath. The compound peeled away in rubbery strips. Halfway through, a sound came from the ceiling speaker grill above him. A crackle. Cal froze. Scraper paused mid-cut. A whisper slid through the crackle. Thin, distorted, like a voice traveling through a long, wet tunnel. Cal? His name. His stomach turned. The speaker went silent. Cal didn't speak. He forced his hands back to work. He cut the last strip of sealant away, flipped the manual release, and felt the mechanism disengage with a satisfying click. The door didn't slide. Motor power was limited, but it loosened enough to push. He braced his shoulder and shoved. The door moved with a reluctant sigh, seals peeling apart. Cold air breathed out. The bridge opened before him like a mouth that didn't want to admit it had ever been used. Cal stepped inside. The bridge was cavernous compared to medbay, command chairs strapped around a central console ring, side panels dead, overhead strips dark. The forward window was a black slab reflecting his lamp beam back at him, the void outside refusing to give him even the comfort of stars. Dust lay in fine drifts. Frost had crept along some console seams like pale fungus. A tethered datapad floated at shoulder height, held by a strap that had twisted and wound itself into a slow spiral in low gravity. No bodies, no blood, just absence. That absence felt unnatural, like a room after a party where all the laughter has been vacuumed out, but the shape of it still clings to the walls. Cal moved to the nearest console and found the manual wake switch. He pressed it. Nothing. He pressed again, held it down. A faint chime answered, weak, like a tired instrument. A small auxiliary screen flickered to life. Dim grey text on black. Command node, standby. Primary core, offline. Safe mode, active. Auth required, command. Safe mode. Not a failure state, a choice. Cal's gaze slid around the bridge, and that was when he saw the thing that made his throat lock. Built into the rear bulkhead was a compact stasis unit. Command emergency cryo. smaller than medbay pods, meant to keep command alive in disasters. A coffin bolted into the wall. Its status diode blinked red. Alive. 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 Cal stared at it, lamp beam trembling slightly. If someone was in there, they had survived 6 months in stasis. If the captain was in there, she might have the answers he needed, and the authority keys he didn't. He forced his eyes away. He could not afford to make a new mistake with a living person as the cost. He pulled open the console service tray. Inside, a capacitor bank sat half drained. His portable pack could jump it. He clipped his pack lead into the bank. Watched the meter. Voltage climbed slowly. The auxiliary screen brightened in degrees, from ghost grey to readable. As power stabilized, the bridge woke in small jerks. A relay clicking, a vent fan attempting to spin and then catching, a soft whisper of airflow beginning overhead. The moment the airflow started, Cal felt something tighten in his chest, as if the ship had just given the creature a throat again. A sound came from the speaker grill behind him. Not static, a soft exhale, like someone breathing just out of sight. Cal turned his head slowly, lamp still fixed on the console, refusing to swing toward the dark behind him. The exhale came again, closer, and then a voice, soft, intimate, not distorted like an old log. Cal. It sounded like Lysa, the medic, the one who had written the note. Cal's skin prickled so hard it hurt. He didn't answer. He counted his breaths. 1, 2. The voice changed, smoothed, softened into something older, something his nervous system recognized before his brain could intervene. His mother. Calvin, baby, come here. His mouth went dry. He squeezed his eyes shut. It can mimic voices. The note had said it. The crew had known. This was the creature using the ship's awake air to shape sound. It wasn't an intercom trick. It was biological. It was close enough to be in the vents, in the bridge's ceiling, breathing his air. Cal forced his eyes open and shoved his mind back into mechanics. He navigated the console menus. Safe mode restricted most functions, but it allowed diagnostics and archives. It had to. Otherwise, quarantine would erase its own justification. His fingers shook as he selected Event Archive. The list populated slowly, system events, last 180 days, Vox logs, crew, engineering notes, command directives, cargo bay incident report. Cal's breath caught. 180 days, 6 months. He had been asleep through half a year. He selected system events first. Less emotional, more grounded. Entries scrolled. Manual breaker trips, segment shutdown confirmations, bridge lockout engagement, comms disabled, ventilation dampers closed, gravity reduced, cryo maintenance routines. Then a repeating warning, unauthorized biopresence detected. Vent trunks, location, variable, response, sectional lockdown. Again and again, every time someone brought a system online, BIOPRESENCEDETECTED. Location, variable, sectional lockdown. Cal's stomach tightened. Biopresence detection wasn't perfect. Environmental sensors could misread moisture and heat. But the system wouldn't repeat it like this, unless there had been something consistently wrong. He backed out and selected Cargo Bay Incident Report. A text file opened. Date: 212.04.13, ship time. Event: unscheduled salvage retrieval. Object: unregistered cold pod/beacon capsule. Action: retrieved to cargo bay 2 for inspection. Incident: pod breach, creature escape. Description: non-human organism, approx. 2.5 meters extended, flexible frame, clawed limbs. Notes: organism. Exhibits vocal mimicry, responds to sound vibration, utilizes ventilation network. Containment attempts, tranquilizer failed, foam barriers breached. Status: crew casualties, ship quarantine initiated. Cal stared at the words until they blurred. A cold pod, a salvage capsule. Someone had brought a thing aboard like an opportunity, and it had become a predator. His lamp beam drifted to the bridge's ceiling vent grill. The whispering fan above him continued, gentle, steady. A faint scratch came from the vent, like nails being drawn along metal fins. Cal's skin went cold. He went to VOXLOGSCREW. The list appeared, names and timestamps. Captain Sarah Callin, Chief Engineer Torin Jax, Medic Liza Wren, Security Officer Rima Holt, dozens more. He selected the most recent, Captain Callin, final. The bridge speakers crackled. Audio emerged thin and tired, compressed by months of standby. Callin's voice filled the bridge. Hoarse, controlled, the voice of someone who had run out of options and chosen discipline anyway. Captain's log: we are not broadcasting. We are not requesting rescue. If you are hearing this, you are aboard this vessel, and you should not be. The creature follows function. It moves with airflow. It uses vibration. It learns voices. We can't keep it out of the ducts. We can only starve it of pathways. We sealed Cal Rourke in medbay. He was in cryo. It cannot mimic what it cannot hear. Medway is our only compartment with sealed scrubbers and amethyst purge capability. We are sorry. If H wakes, he must not restore ship systems. The ship is not abandoned. It is quarantined. Static ate the end. Cal sat back hard into a command chair and felt the straps cold against his spine. They had sealed him in to protect him, to keep the creature away from him. And now he had crawled out through hydroponics, flipped breakers, restarted auxiliary power, spun fans, opened doors. He had fed the ship's arteries back into motion. He had made the ship a hunting ground again. A soft sound came from the bridge vent above him, like breath drawn slowly through a narrow slit. Cal didn't look up. He clicked the next log. SECHOLT 212.04.22. Rima Holt's voice was tight, clipped, pushed through fear. Security note: it doesn't move like anything I've seen. It goes quiet when you look for it, like it's waiting for you to stop paying attention. It can flatten through duct junctions that should be too small. It can hang upside down on the ceiling like it weighs nothing. It's learning our schedules. It waits for shift changes. And it speaks. It spoke to Mads in his daughter's voice. He opened the duct access. It dropped on him. We're sealing vents where we can, but it just finds another route. Cal felt bile rise. He swallowed it down. He clicked another. ENG.J-AX-212.04.25. Torin Jax's voice was tired enough to sound older than it should. Engineering note: power segments have to stay down. The more air we move, the more it moves. We tried baiting it into cargo 2 and venting. It survived the first pressure drop, sealed itself somehow, like it can hold vacuum for short bursts. It hates vacuum, but it can endure it. We are sealing medbay. We are sealing bridge. If Cal wakes, he'll do what engineers do. He'll fix things. We can't let him fix the ship. The ship being broken is the only thing keeping us alive. Cal's hands tightened around the armrest until his knuckles hurt. The voice in the vents above him shifted again, soft and coaxing, now wearing Tauren's cadence. Cal, listen. Don't be scared. Cal's throat tightened. He didn't answer. He reached up and with shaking fingers, manually shut down the bridge vent fan. The fan slowed, whispered, then stopped. The voice in the vents thinned immediately, as if it needed moving air to shape words. Silence returned, sharp and clean. Cal exhaled, shaky. He went to engineering notes and searched for anything about containment procedures. He found a file labeled Quarantine Macro, Maintain Medbay, Vent Rest. He opened it. The ship had a built-in emergency routine. Isolate medbay, activate distress beacon, vent ship sections in a controlled sequence, shut down core power. A plan embedded into the ship like a last resort. Cal's hope rose, thin and dangerous. Then he read the requirement. Requires damage control, key or command Arth. Of course, physical keys, human decisions, a final barrier to prevent accidental venting. Cal glanced at the command stasis unit in the rear bulkhead again. Alive. 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 If the captain was in there, command Arth might be her biometrics. The key might even be on her person. He took one step toward the stasis unit and stopped. Lysa's log. Don't wake anyone else. If he woke the captain and she screamed, the creature would learn another voice. Worse, if it was already in the vents, it would be inches away from her when she woke. He couldn't do that to her. Not unless there was no other option. He backed away. So he needed the damage control key. Where would a damage control key be? In an emergency locker near medbay, in hydroponics maintenance, in a captain's belt pouch on a body. Cal didn't know which was worst. He checked the bridge lockers, small compartments built into the console ring. Most were sealed with compound. Others had been emptied. One locker door was torn open, claw marks raked across its edge. Cal didn't linger. He grabbed what he could. A bridge emergency flashlight, dead, but he could scavenge its battery. A roll of sealant tape, a compact respirator pack, and a small data module labeled DC key sync. Useless without the key itself. As he turned to leave, the bridge's dim auxiliary screen flickered. For a heartbeat, the text warped like it had been breathed on, and from the vent grill above the console ring, a slow, wet sound came. Something shifting in a tight space, mucus catching. Cal's stomach turned. He backed toward the bridge door without turning his back fully to the ceiling. The forward window remained a black slab, his lamp beam reflected off it, showing his own pale face staring back, eyes too wide. He opened the bridge door and stepped into the quarantine corridor. Behind him, in the bridge, something scraped along a duct grill. A metal fin pinged once, bent. Cal didn't wait to hear more. He pulled the door shut and moved fast down the corridor toward the security checkpoint. As he reached the sealed security door, he put his hand on the wheel. On the other side, in the spine corridor, something tapped the door, once, then dragged claws downward, slow, as if writing something into metal. Cal's breath caught. He turned the wheel hard. The seals broke with a groan. He cracked the door open and stepped through. The spine corridor lay ahead, dim emergency strips, long shadows, ducts overhead like black ribs. No creature visible. But the smell was stronger now. Damp musk, sour sweetness, and the faint metallic tang of blood. Cal closed the security door behind him and spun the wheel. He didn't know if it would hold. He only knew he had to move before it decided to test it harder. He headed back toward medbay, toward hydroponics, toward the place the crew had built into a bunker. And as he walked, the ship's faint thump continued, steady, patient, as if counting down something only the creature understood. The return down the spine corridor felt like walking through a mouth you'd already insulted. The emergency strips seemed dimmer, though Cal knew that was his fear speaking. Shadows pooled in corners. The open duct grill halfway down the spine swayed slightly, as if something had brushed past it and left it unsettled. Cal kept his lamp beam low and narrow. He didn't want to give it a spotlight. He didn't want to train his own eyes to look for it in the obvious places, because predators learned what prey did. If he learned to stare at floors, it would learn to drop from ceilings. A soft scuff sounded ahead, so faint it could have been his own boot echo. Cal froze. The scuff didn't repeat. He forced himself to move again, one hand on the rail for balance in low gravity, the other gripping his driver like a small, useless knife. He reached the junction where the sealed door with claw gouges sat on the spine. He didn't look at it this time. Looking at the gouges had been like reading a threat. He kept walking. At the next intersection, the corridor widened into the crew deck access. Emergency strips here were steadier now, fed by auxiliary power. The ship's fans hummed faintly in the walls, quiet but present. Air movement, pathways. Cal hated it, but he needed it for now. Without minimal fans, he'd be moving through stale pockets, oxygen stratifying, humidity making electronics worse. He passed the storage bay door, the one where he'd seen 3-pronged tracks. The door was fully closed now, seated clean. He stopped despite himself. He ran his fingers along the seam. No gap, no catch. Someone or something had finished closing it. The ship might do that on reboot, or the creature might do it because it liked doors closed behind it. Cal stepped away and moved on. As he walked, the corridor lights flickered in a soft wave, dimming as he passed, brightening behind him, like a shadow swimming under the illumination. Cal stopped again, heart hammering. The light steadied. A vent grill above him shifted slightly, then settled. Cal's mouth went dry. He forced himself onward. He reached the stairwell leading up toward hydroponics and medbay. The air grew damp with each step higher, as if hydroponics breathed humidity into the ship's bones, even in low power. On the landing, the dried blood smear on the wall looked darker now under steadier strips. Cal didn't touch it. He climbed. At the top of the stairwell, the corridor widened into the hydroponics adjacent deck. The decon hatch into hydroponics sat ahead. Cal froze. The hatch was ajar. He had latched it earlier. He remembered leaving it mostly shut but unlatched the first time. But he had latched it when he returned to medbay from hydroponics later. He was sure he had. Now it sat open the width of his hand. Warm, wet air seeped out like breath. Cal's skin prickled. He approached slowly, lamp beam fixed on the crack. He didn't hear footsteps, but he smelled the musk more strongly now, threaded with damp plant rot. Cal put his gloved fingers on the hatch wheel. The metal was slightly wet, as if someone had recently touched it with something damp. He swallowed hard. The hatch opened a fraction more without him turning it. Just a soft inward drift, like the pressure difference wanted it wider. Cal shoved it closed and latched it hard. The latch clicked. He held it a second longer, waiting for it to push back. It didn't. Cal backed away and moved toward the corridor junction that led to the comm relay room. He needed the distress beacon active. The bridge logs had said they weren't broadcasting. Safe mode likely held comms offline. If he wanted rescue to ever find this ship, he needed to light a flare into the void. He reached the comm relay hatch, a small room tucked behind a maintenance door. The door panel blinked faintly under auxiliary power. He opened it manually. Inside, the relay room was cramped. Antenna control node, capacitor bank, a small screen. Cal flipped the local breaker. The screen flickered, then displayed comms relay, standby. TX, disabled. Safe mode. Emergency beacon, available. He exhaled. Good. He hit emergency beacon. A warning prompt appeared. Transmission may compromise quarantine. Confirm. Cal's finger hovered. The crew had chosen silence to keep the creature contained. But the creature wasn't contained anymore, not with fans humming and doors responding and Cal moving through lit corridors. Silence now was just dying quietly. He pressed yes. The relay clicked. A dull vibration traveled through the deck, felt more than heard. The screen updated distress beacon. Active. Ping interval, 60 seconds. Signature, quarantine derelict. Message, do not board without isolation. Cal stared at it until his eyes burned. A heartbeat in the void. Now he needed the key to vent the ship. Damage control key. The most likely place, the hydroponics damage control locker. He remembered those cabinets. Yellow stripe, foam seal kits, pressure patches, convenience for leaks. He moved back into the corridor, keeping his lamp beam tight. As he passed the stairwell, he heard something above him. Light, quick, like nails tapping on a vent trunk. Cal froze. The tapping stopped. Silence. Then a sound from behind him in the corridor, a soft, wet step. Cal spun, lamp snapping back. Nothing in the open. But the smell was suddenly stronger, as if something had moved closer without entering the light. Cal's throat tightened. He forced himself to move toward hydroponics. The longer he stayed in open corridors, the more time he gave it to position. He reached the hydroponics deacon hatch again. He latched and spun the wheel open. Warm, damp air rolled out. Cal stepped inside. Hydroponics swallowed his lamp beam with humidity and shadow. Pale vines clung to rails and grates. Leaves trembled faintly, though he didn't feel much airflow. The whispering sound he'd noticed earlier was louder now. Not loud in volume, but more defined, like something breathing through plants. Cal didn't look into the far corners. He moved straight for the damage control locker near the control column. Yellow stripe, sealed with compound. Of course. He crouched and cut through the sealant with brute efficiency. No patience for neatness. The compound peeled away in thick strips. As it peeled, the hydroponics whispering changed, like the bay paused to listen. Cal's skin prickled. He ripped the last strip free and yanked the cabinet open. Inside, patch foam, clamps, seal tape, and a foam slot holding a small rectangular module. Damage control key, DC-1. Cal grabbed it. The moment his fingers closed around the key, something moved in the aisle behind him. Not a step, a glide. Leaves brushed softly, as if a body passed through them without care. Cal turned slowly, lamp beam lifting. At first, he saw only plants. Then the lamp caught on something that wasn't plant. A pale surface, slick with moisture, pressed between vine rows. A curve that might have been a shoulder, except it was too narrow, too jointed. Then a limb unfolded from the foliage. Not an arm. A forelimb with 3 long digits ending in black hooked claws. Joints bending the wrong direction for anything human. The limb touched a rail with delicate care, as if feeling vibration through metal. Cal's breath hitched. The creature eased forward into the edge of his lamp beam. He saw it clearly for the first time. It was tall when extended, but it moved compressed, hunched low, like it could fold itself into half its height. Its skin was pale and semi-translucent in places, stretched over a flexible frame that looked less like bones and more like layered cartilage. Along its back, ridges ran like fins, damp and twitching. No obvious eyes reflected the lamp beam, only a smooth head shape with small slit-like sensory pits that opened and closed along the sides. Its mouth, when it opened, was not a single opening. It was a seam that split vertically, revealing layered inner structures like pale petals, each lined with fine teeth. A wet, quiet click came from within, like a tongue testing air. Cal couldn't move. The creature tilted its head slightly, and then it spoke. Not through a speaker, not through a panel, through its own throat shaping air the way humans did. Cal. It sounded almost exactly like Lysa Wren, the medic's voice, close, pleading. Help me. The words were wrong, slightly flattened, as if the creature didn't quite understand how much breath humans used on consonants. But the tone was perfect. Cal's stomach lurched. He forced his mouth shut, forced his hands not to shake. The creature's head twitched as if it could hear his pulse. Its sensory slits flared wider. It took one step closer. Wet claws clicked softly on metal. Cal backed away, slow. The creature's mouth seemed flexed. Come here, it said in a different voice. Captain Callan now, sharp and commanding. Now. Cal's fear turned into motion. He turned and ran. Low gravity made his sprint floaty, uncontrolled. His boots slipped on slick decking. He grabbed a rail and flung himself forward. Behind him, the creature moved with a speed that made his stomach drop. Not heavy thudding pursuit, quiet, efficient movement, claws placing softly, body flexing like a centipede climbing. Cal hit the decon hatch wheel and spun it hard. The hatch began to close. A clawed limb shot forward and caught the hatch seam. Metal screeched as claw met pressure seal. Cal screamed without sound. He refused to give the creature more noise, but he put his shoulder into the wheel and spun harder. The hatch fought. The creature's limb held. Then Cal did the only thing his hands knew to do. He grabbed his tool pouch and yanked out the seal foam canister. He jammed the nozzle into the hatch seam and fired. Foam erupted, expanding instantly, white, sticky, aggressive. It filled the gap around the creature's limb, forcing the limb back, sealing around it. The creature hissed, a wet, breathy sound, more irritation than pain. Its limb withdrew, claws tearing free of foam with an ugly ripping sound. Cal slammed the hatch shut and latched it, spinning the wheel until his arms burned. The hatch sealed. Hydroponic's humid breath cut off. Cal backed away, chest heaving, eyes locked on the hatch. On the other side, something struck the metal once, hard. The hatch shuddered. Foam creaked. Then silence. Cal stood trembling, forcing his breathing slow. The damage control key was clenched in his fist so hard it hurt. He didn't wait for the creature to decide its next move. He sprinted for medbay. The corridor to medbay was short, adjacent by stupid design, now a blessing. Cal hit the medbay decon hatch, spun it open, and threw himself into the sterile cold air of medbay. He slammed the hatch shut and latched it. For a heartbeat, he stood in the amber light, panting, listening. Nothing but his own breathing and the ship's faint thump. Then, from the medbay ceiling vent, a soft scratch. Cal's blood went cold. He looked up. The vent grill was intact. The scratch stopped. He forced himself to move. He shoved the damage control key into the medbay wall terminal. A beep. The terminal's menu expanded. Damage control access granted. Cal's hands shook as he navigated. Emergency quarantine. Maintain medbay. Vent rest. Sectional vent. Configure. Comms. Status. Beacon. Active. Power. Minimal. Sustain. He selected sectional vent configure. A schematic appeared. Compartments, pressure doors, vent routes. He highlighted everything except medbay. Vent. All compartments, except medbay. Maintain medbay isolation. Seal bulkheads where possible. Lock internal doors. He armed it. The terminal asked for confirmation. As Cal's finger hovered over execute, the medbay main door, the sealed one to the corridor, shuddered. Not a sound, because sound outside might already be thin or still, but a vibration through metal. A slow drag traveled down the door seam, claws writing into the sealant bead. Cal's stomach clenched. He didn't have time to be careful anymore. He hit execute. The ship exhaled. Valves clicked in distant sequence. Bulkheads thumped as they tried to seal. The medbay terminal displayed pressure readings dropping outside in real time. Hydroponics, 92 kilopascals, 70, 50. Spine, 101, 85, 60. Medbay held steady. Medbay, 101 kilopascals, holding. Cal moved fast through medbay, reinforcing seals like a man boarding up a house as a storm approaches. He smeared fresh compound over the medbay main door seam, over the manual release cover, over panel edges. He sealed the decon hatch seam too, thickening the bead. He grabbed the amethyst canister from the emergency kit and set it on the counter. He grabbed the respirator pack and strapped it on. Outside medbay, pressure continued to fall. The ship groaned under structural stress, slow, heavy sounds like a giant shifting in its sleep. Then the medbay ceiling vent began to tap. Once, twice, then faster. Cal's pulse hammered. He looked up, respirator half-seated over his face. The tapping became a scrape. Something pressing against the grill and dragging. The grill flexed slightly, metal fins vibrating. Cal swallowed hard and forced the respirator on fully, sealing it. He went to the terminal and hovered over Amethyst Purge. The crew had planned it. The canister had been left for a reason. He initiated Purge. A violet status bar crawled across the screen. Amethyst. Purge. Active. O2 displacement. In progress. Scrubbers. Closed loop. The medbay air gained a sharp chemical tang, even through the respirator filter. Outside, pressure fell into the range where lungs would fail. Cal watched the numbers drop and wondered where the creature was. In hydroponics? In the spine? In the ducts above his head? He couldn't see it, but he could feel it in the ship. The way the tapping stopped abruptly, as if the creature had decided to move. The way the medbay main door shuddered once more, and then went still. The terminal flashed, ship atmosphere, 10 kilopascals, 5, 2, almost vacuum. Cal stood in the center of medbay, respirator hissing softly, hands trembling. He listened for the creature's voice. None came. He listened for claws. None. The silence felt wrong. Too clean, like the moment after a predator stops making noise and you realize it has learned patience. Then the terminal hit its final line. Ship atmosphere, 0.0 kilopascals, all compartments except medbay. The ship went quiet in a way Cal had never experienced. Not no crew quiet. No air quiet. Fans elsewhere stopped because there was nothing to push. The ship's hum thinned to almost nothing. Sound outside medbay died. Only medbay remained a bubble of breath. Cal should have felt relief. Instead, he felt dread sharpen, because if the creature hated vacuum but could endure it, then all he'd done was remove the creature's noise. And silence was where it hunted best. The medbay terminal pulsed the distress beacon timer down in steady increments. 59, 58, 57. Each time it hit 0, a faint vibration traveled through the deck plates, felt more than heard, like the ship's last heartbeat punching into the void. Cal stood over the terminal, watching numbers, watching his own reflection ghosted faintly in the screen. Amethyst purge completed. O2 reduced, purge complete. Scrubbers, closed loop, stable. Outside medbay, the ship was vacuum. Inside medbay, the air was sharp and thin enough to make his body want to panic. The respirator kept him stable. Without it, the amethyst blend would make breathing feel wrong, urgent, desperate. The crew had chosen a chemistry that would punish anything trying to breathe normally. Cal hoped that included the creature. He wasn't sure it did. He checked the medbay seals again, hands moving on autopilot. Main door sealant bead thick, decon hatch bead thick, manual releases smeared shut. He checked the cryo cradle. Ready. He checked power. Power. Minimal available. Cryo. Ready. Beacon. Active. Auxiliary reactor was still online, but he could spool it down to minimal. The less function, the less movement. The less movement, the less the creature could exploit. He opened power, minimal sustain on the terminal, and selected the crew's preset. Transfer load to medbay battery reserves. Maintain cryo and beacon. Shut down auxiliary reactor. Keep shipwide systems dead, he confirmed. Deep in the hull, the old thump began to slow. Thump. Thump. The vibration through the deck softened. The medbay lights dimmed slightly, then steadied. Cal's world grew smaller. One sealed room. One heartbeat. One man. He turned toward the cryo cradle and forced himself to move. The worst temptation was to wait, standing awake, listening, trying to know if the creature was gone. But he couldn't know. The ship outside medbay was vacuum and silence. If the creature was out there, it could be pressed against the door without making a sound. It could be clinging to the hull. It could be folded into a duck pocket, holding itself still for hours, days. If he stayed awake, he would spiral until he made a mistake. If he slept, he at least removed himself as a moving target. Cal climbed into the cryo cradle. The gel accepted him, cold and familiar. He strapped the harness across his chest, locked it down, checked the latch twice because his hands were shaking. He removed the respirator slowly and set it on the cradle edge. The medbay air tasted sharp and clean, like medicine. It made his throat feel slightly numb. Good. He initiated cryo. The cradle hummed softly. Coolant cycles engaged. A faint vibration as the lid actuators woke. The lid began to descend. Amber light narrowed to a band. Through the narrowing gap, Cal could still see the medbay terminal glowing steady green, the distress beacon timer counting down. He could still see the sealed medbay main door, scarred with compound. Not a door anymore, but a decision. He stared at that door until his eyes burned. He tried to imagine the corridor beyond it. Vacuum, frost, dead air. Maybe the creature had been vented out into space. Maybe it had clung to a bulkhead until its muscles failed and drifted away, silent and spinning. Or maybe it had found a way to seal its body, to endure vacuum the way Torrenjax's log had hinted. Briefly, painfully, but long enough to find shelter. Maybe it had curled into a duck trunk, folded itself small, and waited. Cal didn't know. The lid lowered further. The beacon timer hit 0. A pulse traveled through the cradle frame, then reset. Cal's thoughts slowed as cryo drugs began to smooth his panic into dull distance. And then, right before his awareness slipped over the edge, he felt something through the metal. Not a sound, a vibration. A tiny, delicate tick against the cradle's frame. Once. His stomach tried to lurch. The drugs pressed it down. The tick could have been a relay cycling. As the beacon fired, the cradle settling as temperature dropped, the ship contracting under cold soak, or a claw tapping metal somewhere in the medbay wall. Cal couldn't tell. That was the point. He let the uncertainty sit in his mind like a pebble you couldn't shake free. The lid sealed with a soft clunk, final and heavy. Cold flooded in. The last thing Cal was aware of was the medbay terminal's steady glow through the lid's frosted edge, and the beacon timer continuing its patient countdown. A heartbeat in the dark, a sealed room breathing, a dead ship drifting, and somewhere in the ship's silent vented corridors, whether empty or not, something waiting in the absence of air, perfectly quiet, perfectly unreadable. Thanks for watching Echo Forge. If this story resonated with you, leave a comment, hit like, and subscribe so the next tale finds you. Share this with someone who loves dark fantasy or twisted sci-fi, and I'll see you in the next world.